On this episode of NorCal News Now, we're speaking with Republican U.S. Senate candidate James Bradley. I'm your host, Mike Richmond.
And I'm political consultant Aaron Haar.
And co-host.
What up, Mike?
Yeah, how you doing, Aaron?
Doing good.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad you could be here today.
Yeah.
As every day.
Yes.
Because the show just wouldn't work as well. It's like a plane with only one wing. You know, you gotta both be there.
I'm here for just commentary and for the party.
You're there, man. You're there all the time. All right, well, let's get into it because our guest on today's show is a good one, and we're gonna have a good time today. He's a veteran, he's a businessman, and he's a proudly conservative Republican running for the U.S. Senate here in the state of California. James Bradley, welcome to NorCal News Now.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. It's our pleasure to have you, James. Thank you for coming aboard and joining the party. We like to have kind of a wide-ranging discussion with all of our guests, and I have a feeling this one's going to be good. So we really appreciate you spending the time with us. Well, let me ask you this question to kind of kick us off, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I looked at your bio a little bit and I looked at your site. So I think from what I could gather, this is your first foray into the world of politics. So what made you kind of want to jump into the arena at this particular point in time?
That's a good question, and I get questioned on that often from my family members and good friends. Why do I want to go into the lunacy of politics? Mainly because I've been watching the decline, in my opinion, of where we are as citizens in our country. And I'm a veteran, as you mentioned, as you did your homework. And I served under the Reagan administration. And back then, it was a completely different world. So you fast forward to today, you don't even recognize who we are, what we're doing, and our purpose. So that was primarily the reason. And I think that my background could speak to, some of the key issues of the divide that's going on here in the United States. Because I've been voting most of my voting history as an independent. So I have a very different look. I'm not an extremist. Am I a moderate? Yeah, I'm definitely moderate in some cases. But I do believe the core values of America should be discussed in more of a balanced approach. That's the main reason why I came in, to help out where I can. If I can't get out, I do believe in term limits. And
it seems like you believe platform over party, I think is what you said.
Absolutely. It's all about the platform, because the platform really speaks to the voters, because that is our role. When we swear an oath to office, as I did in the Coast Guard, my oath was to the country, but now as a politician, if I'm so lucky, it's going to be to the voters. Not me, not the special interest groups, but to the voters.
Well, California, of course, and Aaron and I kind of were debating this a little bit going into the show, but I'll let Aaron jump on this if he's got a redirect for me. But I would say California, I think, is one of the more liberal-leaning states in the union.
Used to be.
I think it still is. I think so. But you're running, James, as I can say, I think you would agree, a conservative Republican is what I would consider you. And a lot of what your website talks about, it would seem to me, is in support of an America First, pro-Trump agenda. And certainly looking at things like fundraising, name recognition, polling numbers, things like that. And of course, there's 25 people running for the seat. You have I would say it's fair to say you have a fairly considerable hill to climb here. So given all that, how can you realistically expect to win over not only moderates, but certainly people that consider themselves liberals here in the state to vote for you?
Well, I'm really trying to focus on our commonalities, because if you do a line across the different parties in our political persuasions, you'll see a lot of common points. So I want to focus on that first. And yes, I do have a steep hill to climb. I'm a grassroots candidate. I don't have any big funding, no special interest. And I prefer it that way because it allows me to maneuver. I'm a little more nimble, and I'm not beholden to those special interest groups. So maybe it's a long shot, but I'm beholden to our beliefs and my dedication and commitment to be a citizen as well as a veteran, to see what I can do from my level to bring some level of sanity back into government. So that was primarily the reason. But more importantly, where I think I could do well is I speak to the voters. my background is multicultural. I have Black, Hispanic. Of course, I'm a little whiter than Hispanic. But I think I have a really balanced view on what the issues are and where we can draw our commonality. So I think if that speaks to the voter, I'm your man. If you do the polarization, a party, and you want to go with your party, then obviously I would not be the right choice. But I think I do speak to majority of the voters in California. They're looking for some level of sanity in government, and I speak to that.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of the voters in California, I mean, I would consider myself to be left of center. I don't consider myself to be far left and extremely progressive. I consider myself to be a left centrist voter. And I know there's things that I have values of that I tend to want to vote for. I think that, single payer healthcare makes a lot of sense. I think that, I believe that ICE should be, not rounding people up and deporting them, people that aren't violent criminals. I think people should be given a chance to be citizens of the country. I believe that there should be breaks for people to go to college. A lot of these things, I don't believe that taxes, should necessarily come down for people that are wealthy. I mean, there's things that I believe that maybe aren't things that you believe. So convince me where I'm wrong on any of that.
I'm not going to, because I believe you're right on most of those points. I'm all about looking at what we have currently and trying to refine what we have instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. As you look at the ICE situation, SB 54 by Kevin De Leon, the immigration issue in DACA, I want to give them a pathway to citizenship. Those that have been here for a while that need some level of or hope that they won't be deported, I hear that. That resonates for who I am. So the pathway to citizenship for the immigrants is really important for me to create a plan. But there has to be checks and balances. And there does have to be a vetting process, because we do have a real serious issue about the illegal criminals in the state of California. We have MS-13. We have the Mexican cartel, the mafia. So those are the people, and the list goes on. So that's what the vetting process is designed to take care of. Those that have been living here for several generations, come on, let's take care of them. They need to be taken care of. Get them in the system. Let's get them in the system paying taxes, because that's going to help us all out too. Because a lot of them, if they do pay taxes, it's minimal. It's sales tax. It's perhaps small variation of what we contribute as taxpayers and citizens. So I think there's a win-win scenario that we can really approach. And the refinement of our immigration laws is really one of my key initiatives when I get in office. But am I going to deport them? No, there has to be the pathway to their citizenship is so important. And I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine call me the other day saying that he has an 18-year-old dear friend of his living in a house that his parents bought, but have been deported. And they've been here for at least a generation. Then he asked the question, what are you going to do about that, James? I said, we're going to reunite that family. We're going to bring them back to the country, and we're going to reunite that family. So if you look at my website, you'll see reunite. That's what it speaks to, is reuniting families regardless of immigration status. But if they are illegal, let's make them legal.
Yeah, and it speaks to some things that are going on in some communities around here too. Grocery store clerks that have been and owned their grocery store for 30 years. A man was deported in a small town here, and the whole community is missing him, and actually the community is missing the tax revenue because it was the only grocery store in town.
Let's bring him back.
Yeah, and we have some other counties here that are struggling with true criminals, that aren't from another country, and they're being arrested and released in the same day because we just don't have the jail space. And one faced 3 arrests in one day. And I mean, do you think the federal government should be maybe helping out with that as opposed to taking away families? I guess is
you nailed it. They should be focused on the criminal element, in my opinion. And the SB 54 kind of protects the criminals as well as just the illegals. So when that came up on the board, I think it was October last year, I was very concerned. And that's why you're seeing a large number of cities here in Southern California, and more growing, that are opting out of SB 54. So yes, criminal, that's our concern, right? Mm. But illegal, let's make them legal. That's the important. It's for their benefit as well.
Yeah, and I really think, I mean, Mike and I always talk about tax revenue and the revenue and it's a huge revenue source, and it's a huge, wealth in some of our communities here is to some of those DACA recipients, and they give a lot of, they've followed the rules, and you can't blame them for that. And I just wonder about their Social Security money and all these things that they've kind of invested in our country that they've trusted to receive, and they might not receive those things now.
And that's a crime, in my opinion.
Let's talk about your opponent, and I guess I'm not going to try to hold the ball too much, but I do argue the point that we are as democratic as people think in this state. I mean, we have a two-party runoff system, which kind of allows, or the two-person runoff, which kind of allows for candidates to really hone out the middle for votes. And I think we see it in policy, too. I mean, we have a Democratic majority now, and I don't really see huge progressive policies being passed in the state, where I see other states banning fracking, banning assault rifles, and some other things. As we were a little late from other states on marijuana, and we see states like Maryland having universal health care. So I do argue the point that we are so progressive. However, I do think I do tend to credit our economic success with some of the Democratic policies. But your opponent, Dianne Feinstein, is facing a lot of heat from, not only the right, but also the left. Mm-hmm. In fact, here in California, there are many progressives who are deeply opposed to her candidacy. 69%, I think, are undecided in this election. And what in her voting record do you specifically call attention as a means to winning over some of your voters?
I think she has a history of the last year to do nay vote on most of the nominations, as well as the adoption of Medicare, expanding Medicare for the. I'm glad you asked that question. Medicare for to kind of replace the Obamacare. That was my biggest concern, because when I came up for vote, she didn't vote. And I'm still don't understand why she wouldn't vote. So she plays more on the moderate side, I would imagine, or more of a centrist. I guess that's what you would call her, a centrist Democrat. So if you have the progressives, extremely progressive, yes, she would not be the candidate or the incumbent you would vote for re-election. Plus the fact, I think, and I hate to say this because I have a father who's 95. And he is sharp as a tack. This guy, you can't get anything by him. And I can't really speak to Dianne, but she's come to a point in her life that she really seriously needs to consider retirement. Enjoying her life, enjoy her wealth, because she's accumulated quite a bit of wealth over the years. So I think where I may have an advantage is I speak freshly. I speak to probably the large populace, because if we want sanity in government, we want reunification. If there's a way to do it, I'll find a way. Trust me, I will find a way. But yeah, Dianne, it's her time to move on and enjoy life. All right.
Well, James, one of the ways that we try to create some level of honest debate, space for honest debate on this show is we try to be upfront about our views, and we want to hear other people's views too, like yourself. I mean, I think that we've already seen in this interview that we have some differences of opinion, and that's healthy and that's good. And to be blunt, I mean, I don't think it's any surprise to you or any of our listeners. We're not huge Trump fans. We've had our issues with the president. Respect the office, of course, undoubtedly, but we've had some issues with President Trump. So we do want to make sure we don't get lost within that by playing into the echo chamber of just vitriol and anger at some of the policies. We want to listen to some of the things that Trump supporters advocate for and believe that he's done well. So what are maybe 2 or 3 things that you can point to that you think have been very successful in the Trump presidency over the first year and a half?
There's quite a few, in my opinion, anyway. I think the deregulation for businesses to start growing. There's been a hollowing out over the last administration of the smaller businesses because of over-regulation. And I'm a business person. I look at ways of stimulating or creating business. So with Donald Trump in office, it's kind of cleared the pathway. Though the only thing that's holding us back was the Dodd-Frank. So we're hoping to have some adjustments to the Dodd-Frank Act. The other ones would be, I think the stock market is, you can't deny that fact, that it's just soared record highs since, I think, the early 70s, I believe. They've seen this level of increase. The unemployment rate, some can dispute that, but I believe if you look at the numbers, you'll see clearly that the unemployment rate is much lower than it has been in years. And as well as the unemployment for the blacks and Hispanics and younger folks. So you're seeing job growth, you're seeing businesses coming back into the United States that have since left from the past administration. So you're seeing this economic stimulus, hope. Those are the key aspects I think of. Now, the immigration is still very volatile, so I'm not going to talk about that as much, but I can point out during Obama's administration, I think it was 2014, 2015, he deported record numbers as opposed to Donald Trump. And when you reflect back on Dianne Feinstein's position in 2000, I think it was 2007 and 9, somewhere around there, she was, 1993 it was. She was more hardline than our president. So, yeah, I know it's a different day, but the reality is you can't deny the facts. The facts are the stock market's up. We're liking that for business. Regulation is now decreasing. The job rate is up. Housing sales are up much higher, especially in California. Have you seen the increase, I'm sure, where you live? Mm-hmm. So you're looking at the economy. It's just helping people. It's creating jobs. It's getting us out of that welfare mentality where you're imprisoned several generations. And that's another thing that I'm going to tackle once in office. I'm going to take care of the welfare issue, or at least propose some good changes.
Well, James, I want to push back on you, though, because there's a lot there. There's some things that you said that I would concur with. I mean, I think that stock market growth generally does, rising tide generally does tend to lift most boats, if not all boats. But one thing I definitely want to push back on there is what you said at the beginning with regard to deregulation. And I mean, to me, deregulation is not necessarily, I mean, many people on the right will say it's a universal good. But I mean, those regulations, especially with regard to some of the EPA regulations that Scott Pruitt has, certainly not been very supportive of, they're there for a reason. I mean, they're there for a reason. We want clean air, we want clean water in this country, and I mean, Dodd-Frank as well is there for a reason. I mean, there's been history in this country when regulations are loosened, there tend to be more issues. And I am concerned about that. How would you respond?
Well, you're talking about Scott Pruitt. Scott Pruitt, of course, that's a big subject of late. And my belief is, for the EPA, I like what's happening here because we lead the way for air quality in regulation. But would it apply across the United States? Because we kind of create the gold standard that every other state has to comply with. So I've seen the advances over the years. The question is, when you start placing more demands, and here's an example, increase miles per hour, I believe is the next going into effect in another year or two. So it's placing those demands on those automobile manufacturers, Ford, Chrysler, and the other ones to re-engineer their engines. So that's where the cost increase for us as consumers. But of course, the benefit is the environment. I'm an environmentalist, by the way, just so you know. And I do believe that we definitely need some very strict rules in place. But there's I'm looking for parity. There's got to be a balance between how much do you take away from us as citizens and limit our ability to grow in business, and also the burdens we place on the environment. So there has to be that balance. So I'm always looking for balance, not extremes, but parity and balance. So I respect your differences.
There have been great Republican policies in the past that have dealt with the environment. I mean, the Clean Water Act, I believe it was under Reagan.
Earth Day started under Nixon.
2
days from now.
We have Eisenhower that had some. But now we have a Department of Interior that has Ryan Zinke and some fellow big oil, people who've either worked for big oil or have money delivered to them by big oil. And we've kind of seen the conservationist conservative kind of move out of the party. And that worries me too. I mean, as far as some of those regulations. But do you think Republicans should get back to being those good stewards of the land?
Absolutely. Yeah, when you sacrifice our environment, you're sacrificing future generations. And I'll give you an example. I love Whole Foods. I absolutely love Whole Foods. And I love organics. We have to feed our body. We have to take care of our body. We have to take care of our earth. So you probably won't hear that from many conservatives, but from me, definitely, I've been living that life for many, many years. So, yeah, I'm a little different from the conservatives, but we do have to put that back into the conservative mindset, because I can't believe the polarization going on. It's shocking to me. So yes, I speak conservative. I believe in recycling.
I saw that question, and I was actually thinking before that question about what is some things that Trump done well, and I tried to sit and think about it, and there have been some things on some days that I came home and my significant other was upset about this or that. And I said, nah, that I'm kind of happy that he did that. So there have been some few things. I felt like the strike on Syria was needed. A lot of people don't agree with me on that.
It's all based on intel. The thing is, being in the military, I understand you're about as valuable as the intelligence that's provided. So I always question the source of the intel and the purpose of a strike. This being a surgical strike, and I didn't think they had one fatality, did they?
I do not believe so.
So to me, those are resources well spent. It sent the message, and it had shockwaves through, obviously through Syria. So we have to be, the administrations of the past tend to be a little weaker in policy and the strength, and that's why I admire that Trump. He's allowing that intel to come through and make some, I think, clearer decisions, as opposed to doing. I don't want to put myself on a limb. Trust me, I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible. But there were some questionable decisions in past administrations that really just shocked most of Middle America, and I think a lot of progressives. So, yes.
Yeah. At the end of the day,
the purpose behind Syria.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I'd like to see congressional approval, and then we have all these committees and different things that are set up to look at foreign policy and foreign endeavors. But
we had checks and balances.
But he is the commander in chief, and it's a tough one to call.
We had John Garamendi on the show a couple of months ago. Was talking about war powers, and it's pretty clear that's the executives. But I mean, it's pretty clear that at this stage in our country's history, the president, the executive branch, is pretty much the control of foreign policy.
Well, with John Bolton in there now, I wouldn't,
it's executive branch.
Be a little more inclined to have a little bit more congressional approval. I don't mind that he's talking to generals. I don't mind that he's talking to somebody like John Bolton that has been such a war hawk.
I think with the prolonged theater or operations, that's when you want to seek the congressional approval. But for surgical strikes that took place, and for the purpose, I mean, you can't deny the purpose of the gassing. Again, it's the question of intel. Was it true or was it not true? Because we've heard so many from different sources that it was staged. So ISIS staged it, or wasn't. So there's always that question of the truth of the intelligence. So I think For that time, it was strike. But if it's a prolonged period, definitely we need to get congressional approval without question.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you're right. The intel's still a little murky, as it always is in areas of conflict. I mean, the white hats at the UN have not been able to get into Duma to even really check. So that right there indicates some level of guilt on the part of the Syrian government, I would imagine.
And a not so shocking misinformation campaign from Russia.
Yeah, exactly. That's what was going on.
Well, now that we've given some upside of the Trump administration, level with us, I think it's fair to say if you're for or against some of Trump's policies, leaders in the past, with his temperament and management style, have often found themselves in tight spots legally. Mm-hmm. If you become senator, there's a chance you might be voting on an impeachment of Donald Trump on a trial. Talk to us about what you're thinking around those things as far as the Mueller investigation and some different things.
Certainly. Let's just remove the name of any name, just the person in a position that is his question. I always look at letting due process take place and evidentiary, the process of collecting enough evidence to prove guilt. Now, if it was an act that was committed during his presidency or her presidency, that's the one that question. If it was perjury during a hearing, that's another thing. So we have to compartmentalize where the incidents or the suspicion or the acts that they're trying to impeach on, where did it stem from? Was it pre-presidency or was it post? If it was post, if there's enough evidence proving guilt, then we have to go down that path. But right now, I haven't seen anything to that effect. No guilt. And everything that's been presented thus far, it's always been pre his presidency characters. His character, better way to describe it is like the bedside manner of any particular person. We can agree to disagree. We can agree, respect them, but not like them. And I've kind of taken the course that being from the East Coast originally, I'm used to that kind of personality type. So it doesn't bother me. I'm pretty thick-skinned. So I always look for facts, look for evidence. If he's off, hold him to account. We're going to hold him accountable, like we are any politician, anyone that's serving the interest of the United States and the citizenry. So I'm a firm believer about following due process and making certain there's enough evidence to go further.
Well, a couple things with regard to that. I mean, one thing I think that many people across the political spectrum, in this case pretty rarely, could agree upon with regard to James Comey is that I think Comey's right. I think that Trump's misdeeds, if they are established, should be cured at the ballot box. I think that Comey was right to say that. I think that I don't believe that Trump will be impeached personally. I think impeachment is a political act way more than it is a legal act. And if I understand the law properly, you need a majority in the House and then 2/3 of the Senate. So you would need 67 senators to agree to impeach and remove Donald Trump. That's never going to happen. That's never going to happen unless he literally, as he said, shot somebody on Madison Avenue and was proven to have done it. I mean, I just don't see it ever happening. But now, if Mueller's investigation does uncover some clear evidence of misdeeds, I think you're going to see Trump have some real issues with that at the ballot box in 2020.
Well, I don't agree with James Comey. I agree with James Bradley that we need to let the investigation play out and have due process.
Yeah, that too. Yep. So James,
that's all we can do.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that there's a lot of Democrats. I don't think so much in the Democrat lawmakers, people that are sitting in Congress and the Senate. But I think certainly the grassroots, I think a lot of grassroots Democrats are angry. And they want to see an impeachment go through. And again, impeachment's not a legal proceeding, really. It's really a political proceeding.
We have to think. We have to go with facts always. The feelings will come and go, and it'll dissipate over time. But as in my role, I have to deal with the facts only. Yeah, there's certain aspects that you have to balance facts and feelings and emotions clearly. But and that's dealing with humanistic aspects. Hurricane relief, absolutely, without hesitation. And that's where I was really proud, I can say that about Dianne Feinstein, that she didn't hesitate, during the hurricane relief. She voted yes. So it's that balance that has to take place. But when it comes to hard law and the rule of law, our Constitution, applying the Constitution, that has to be very clear that if you're going to bring anyone to trial, especially for impeachment, and you're right, it will probably never happen. It probably will be at the ballot box. But I think there's like another 2 years to play there. He was never admitted to be a politician. In some ways, I'm glad he isn't, because I'd rather him speak the truth and be himself, regardless if he's heavy-handed or vulgar or tweets too much. I'd rather see that level of directness. And you can question honesty, but I love directness because that's where I'm from, and I could deal with people being honest and direct.
A little bit more about Trump. I want to get your opinion on this. Is certainly there's been a lot of question. I think that this is really part and parcel of the Mueller investigation about his relationship with Russia and Putin personally. And certainly there's a lot of bipartisan agreement, in the Congress, in the intelligence community, that Russia has made a habit in recent years of very aggressively going after American interests, trying to sow discord. And I think wherever you are in the political spectrum, I think you can agree that that's not a good thing and that it is happening. And I think as a Democrat, I think that President Obama in the 2012 election was wrong to kind of make fun of Romney's warnings about this very issue. How would you comment about that?
I agree, but we're not a stranger for doing the same thing. We, in essence, are accusing the accuser. We're the accusers of being guilty of the same crime. So to validate their involvement in the last election, I'm still waiting to hear the evidence. I know it's still being under the investigative committee, so I'm still waiting to hear the true findings. So it's still out. Give me evidence. If there's collusion, on either side, if it was Hillary's campaign or if it's Trump's side, that needs to be exposed. The question is the time when the OIG report will come out. We don't know yet. So their level of involvement, I don't know. I can't answer the question. But if there's a high level of involvement that swayed the vote or the election, then we'll have to deal with it at the time. But it's too early, in my opinion, to tell without the evidence and the facts.
Well, I don't think we need to necessarily wait for the investigation to unspool every last bit of information here. I think that Occam's razor says that it's logical that Russia is actively, not only in America, but all over the world, trying to undermine democracies. And I think Russia is not our friend. I mean, Trump, I think, is right to try to cautiously have a better relationship with Russia. But you need to be super mindful of the fact that these people are not our friends. The government is not a friend of America.
I agree. I think in time we'll find out a little bit more information on their involvement in our last election. But you're right. You always have to be very cautious. But if you study the art of war, remember that little phrase, keep your enemies closer. I
thought that was the Corleones, actually, but okay.
Oh, was it Corleones?
No, it is art of war, though.
So, yeah, I believe strongly that the international policy relationship, you need to mend, you need to create bridges, regardless of how caustic the relationship is. So distancing and shutting them down, going back into a Cold War, is just reversing the advances we've had under, honestly, that 50 plus years that we were under Cold War. That was just brutally cold. But if we can maintain some level of diplomacy, let's do it. If they are, and we're guilty of the same. Let's be honest there. We've interfered with other elections throughout the world. Let's be mindful of that. So when we point fingers, that finger's being pointed at us as well. So yes, we have to deal with Russia, and I think he's doing it very smartly. He's going with measured response. I think like anyone should do, measure it, be balanced, then weigh out the fact of the evidence as it floats to the top, And because right now there's a lot of things percolating that's suspicion that's really, in my opinion, not really validated. So give me evidence, and I think Trump's handling it right with the sanctions. So keep those sanctions tight, but more importantly, keep that door open, keep that line, open so you can have a discussion. Because once you close that line down, that's when the whole world changes. You have China, you have Russia. You got to be very mindful and careful of our relations with them, and North Korea.
Yeah, and it could just be diplomatic posturing, but the same intelligence agencies that are giving him information on Syria basically sat down and said, Russia has done this. So I thought the sanctions he put on the oligarchs were tough. I mean, they say if you want to get to Putin, you go after the oligarchs because that's who holds his money. And he seems to be wanting to walk that back a little bit. Do you feel like he's having a tough time negotiating how tough to be on Russia versus still wanting to keep an open line of communication? I mean, it's obviously a hard path to walk.
It's a difficult one to balance, and you'll see that more and more. But he loves doing what they call trial balloons. He'll put it up there. He'll go hard. Only he'll bring it in, kind of like the DACA thing. Remember the DACA thing? Mm-hmm. Well, instead of the 800,000, we'll give you 1.5. I mean, that was an amazing way to negotiate and bring all the Democrats to the table and see where they went with it, and they didn't go anywhere with it. So that's his business style, and his, of course, administration style is to put it out there, bring it back, negotiate hard, like he has with other countries. I admire that, and I guess history will tell the success of it. But so far, so good. But him paring back, it's probably not a bad thing. He probably has some good intel of why he's doing it. But we know Putin, man, he's hard line. Putin will only respect strength. Only. If you don't stand up to that man, you might as well forget it. You just leave the room because you won't get anywhere. Your relationship like it did with Obama. So he has to be strong, but he's paring it back for reasons I'm not aware of. But I have to put my trust in the president that he's getting good intel and he's moving it forward. And hopefully in time it will end up being the right decision.
Well, I want to get to tax cuts. Before that, you talk to a lot of voters, I'm sure, out where you're going. And are there some Republicans that you talk to that are frustrated that there's not a wall? Because you talked about that deal. And, I mean, he cut DACA. And Democrats have said, we were willing to do the wall for DACA. And do you hear some pushback from Republicans you talk to who thought for sure that there would be a wall by now, or at least the process of getting that diplomacy put through or that policy put through? I mean, that deal was on the table.
It was, but it wasn't good enough. If you've witnessed his style over time. And he actually put the numbers up a little higher on DACA, by the way. I think he really was looking for most of the funding coming in or approved. So, he's very creative when it comes to getting, what he needs to get the job done. I say it's not over yet. I say that give it some time. You're going to start seeing some changes in the omnibus, because omnibus is not the budget. Mm-hmm. It may change between now and year end. So all in all, and that's the beauty of what we do in business and in government. Nothing's static. Things will change, hopefully for the better, with the right influence in the right direction, and technically not strategy, because even today strategy is outdated, I'm finding. Mm-hmm. So today is you have to be very nimble. You have to adjust quickly. So getting the budget for the wall, that may come from a different avenue. Don't know yet. I don't think. I think what they're really upset with the Republicans was the omnibus. That's what you're referring to. Mm-hmm. This is signing off with Planned Parenthood and all the rest. But again, there's a lot of time between now and year end. There could be a lot of adjustments. So I think he was successful in getting the budget for the military. That has been I don't know how many years now. It's been about at least 5-6 years now. The budget has not increased. It actually decreased over time, and we needed to retrofit or just outfit our military with some replacement inventory and equipment that we left over in the Middle East. So that was part of the reason, and I'm glad he did that. As a veteran, I'm glad he did that. So you give a lot sometimes to get a little. Sometimes you give a little to get a lot. So we'll see how this plays out.
We're not trying to hit you too hard, but speaking of giving, speaking of giving a lot, the Trump voters didn't get their wall, but they did get a huge tax cut for the wealthy. And some numbers came out today, and it's something that Republicans are very, very proud of. And it's one of the big markers for the Trump administration is this great tax cut.
The crowning achievement of Paul Ryan's career.
And some numbers just came out today, James, about the some polling numbers on the tax cut. And a recent Gallup poll just came out today. 48% of respondents said they disapprove of the tax cuts, while just 39% approve, which seems surprising given the tax cuts boosted take-home pay for roughly 2/3 of American workers.
That's an amazing
poll
result. That's amazing to me.
Now, Republicans in Washington are so dismayed by the tax unpopularity that they're considering another round of tax cuts, although passage seems unlikely. And I don't know if that's the omnibus bill.
No.
Okay, well, Americans don't like the tax cut. And basic reasons are people think the tax cuts favor the wealthy over the middle and working class. They're suspicious that the tax cuts for businesses are permanent, but the tax cuts for individuals are temporary. And they think it's irresponsible, and I think this is a big one, to finance the tax cut with debt that future workers will have to shoulder. So how do you measure that to voters you talk to of wanting to be fiscally conservative, but yet adding such huge debt in favor of helping wealthy Americans?
Well, I like how you phrase that, wealthy Americans, because I think there's that 1%, it's getting to a point
uber wealthy Americans. Yeah, it is tough.
Well, actually, most of the uber wealthy Americans are Democrat. They are. Look at look at Silicon Valley. Look at all the billions there. I believe that we need a heck of a lot more refinement in the tax reform. And that's part of the reason why I want to get in, because of my background in finance. So I don't know. I mean, the poll that came out today, I'm not, I don't have that information in front of me. And I always question polls. I always do. Just my nature. I'm just cynical. But, that the crumbs, member Pelosi said, I was shocked when she said that. And they said, I could use some of those crumbs, honestly. But getting back to, yes, one of my missions is to look at the tax reform and tighten it up so middle Americans can get a bigger tax break. And again, we're gonna address the upper wealth, because if they are getting a bump, we're gonna talk about that, and we're gonna make some reform. That's my promise to the American people, because I don't agree with that.
10 years ago, we had the economic meltdown, and I mean mainly because Wall Street really took advantage. No one went to jail for that. The Dodd-Frank was basically to shore up some of that so it wouldn't happen again. The Wells Fargo had a case today. Now they owe the government $1 billion for their fraudulent things. But what happened was, during the tax cut, Wells Fargo got $2.5 million in one day from a tax cut. So this $1 billion that we're basically putting on them as a fine for their wrongdoing, they don't even feel it. And I mean, $1 billion to you or me is just a enormous amount of money that we can't even fathom. To a place like Wells Fargo, it was, we got that, no problem. So where are we going to find measures that can keep them honest? And I guess one of the questions I have, since you are and have a financial background, is something like an FTT tax or a financial trade tax on Wall Street. Would that be something you would possibly take a look at?
I would look at it, honestly, because I think because I look at the framework and the net effect. So, the outcome, you're trying to get outcome X. But I want to make certain that it's sound and it's, of course, legal, for one. But we can make it legal if it makes a good algorithm or a good formulary. So, yes, the answer is yes. I'd love to look at that. I obviously haven't looked at it. But, honestly, that's under a big microscope in my world, tax, because I deal with that all the time. And, if that recent poll that you're speaking of is accurate, and we'll find out if that is, because there's always question of the pollsters, then we need to do something about it, because that is the voice of the people. So we need to address that. And it's just a question of how do we get to the end result. I'm not surprised about Wells Fargo. It's just the nature of big banking. But how can we curtail that where they don't make such a rich day? Because that's an amazing day in our world. I mean, we could retire 3 times over with that kind of money. But yes, address it. And I'm all about digging deep, finding out where the problems lie, coming up with the best possible solution and strategy. So it's on the table. We got to deal with it. It's one of my very, very first objectives or missions is to deal with that, and also the level of corruption in government, because you can see what's going on. It all fits together. Corruption in government, the payoffs, favoritism. It just, as a commoner, because I'm just a business guy. I look at this and said, how can we continue to get away with this madness, this insanity? So taxation, immigration reform, bring those families together. That is really a big concern of mine. I'm probably there's probably quite a few conservatives out there with a big heart. I probably have a bigger heart than most conservatives because I was independent. So that is my position. We're going to look at all these things. We're going to dig in deep. Hopefully, at the end of the day, we come up with a good plan that makes sense to everybody. Everyone give a little bit so we can all get a lot, and focus on the commonalities and then work on the differences. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think so. Thank you, James. I'd like to return, if I could, to immigration, because I think it's a topic we didn't quite, I think, complete our discussion about that, and it's definitely one of the big conflicts between the state of California and the federal government right now, and actually between the state of California and certain municipalities within the state of California about the issue of immigration reform. Now, states' rights advocates would say that California should be able to decide for itself on this issue. So, what do you say about that?
They're pulling up Article 10. I go back to Article 1, which means we have to have, as citizens, are one of our rights is to have safety. Going to Article 3-1, that means the supremacy clause, as you know, for immigration that falls under the federal authorities. So it's a balance, it's a tightrope. I honestly feel, and I'll go back to the Constitution as being our true law and the rule of law. I believe that it falls within their purview, immigration. However, the Article 10 is the question. How do we get around it? So that's where SB 54 came in, under Kevin De Leon. So to address your question, I think if it would fall under the federal authority, that's really my position. I think we need to keep some level of continuity throughout the states, because if we have one door open, allowing many illegals coming in, and we have many states bordering us, unless we have walls, we create a wall between California and the rest of the states, it doesn't make any sense. So you have to have some level of unity in the application in the rule of law.
It's interesting to me because, I mean, there's always been this idea that the idea of a very strong federal government historically in recent U.S. history has really been more of a democratic, more of a liberal idea. And this idea of small government and states' rights has always been more of a conservative Republican idea. And now this issue of immigration almost seems to be flipping that on its side.
I know. I see a lot of that lately. I see a lot of the Dems going, well, I see the Democrats going more progressive and globalist, which is really shocking to me, because my father, he was a Democrat, and I started off being a Democrat early life, and we all kind of flipped back into the Republican. He did. He's a Republican all his voting history, and I've been independent. But it's really hard to say now. If you honestly think back, so many changes in the platforms of the party. You look for some level of consistency and common thread. You see kind of like it bounces around. So I don't know where to go with that one, honestly. I really don't know where to go with it. I like the Constitution to be applied across the board, because you have the First Amendment, Second Amendment, all the different amendments that apply to each citizen. I believe in the separation of power and keeping the states' right somewhat unique and sovereign. Well, not the sovereign country, but I don't know where the Democrats have gone with that particular issue, other than reeling it back into the state. So you bring up a very good point.
Well, let's get into your wheelhouse here, James. And I think it's healthcare. I mean, I think you have some real experience in creating some healthcare options internationally. Is that right? And you've drafted some things.
Yeah, I've done a little international business. I kind of fall what they call on medical futuristics. But I've been involved in building health plans at the state level, workers' comp and group health, combining the coverage together so they would call it 24-hour coverage. So I have that years of experience, also Medicare, Medicaid, Medi-Cal. So I know those environments really well, the different legislation and the policies and the compliance issues. So dealing with the Obamacare and the healthcare reform is something that I really want to jump into. And what I find shocking, as I mentioned earlier, was the Medicare for All. That was a plan, I think, if it was refined, I think it would get a yay vote from both sides of the aisle. Because that truly is a system that's in place, that's working fairly well, that needs to be refined with some medical futuristics. It's a new refinement in technology to increase level of care, increase the quality outcomes. Because there's so many studies out today. Yeah, this is my wheelhouse, by the way. And I'm very passionate about it. The longevity in life, there's no reason why anyone today, depending on the genetic makeup, there's things that can deal with genetic issues as well, that we can't live longer, healthier, and a more stronger quality of life. So I want to tackle this. I think that we owe it to us and our parents, because they're in that generation now in Medicare, and of course our youth, but opening it up. We want to make this the universal healthcare coverage, but also making it available to have private care, private insurance as well. So you want to have that availability, because those 1%ers, those billionaires, may not like the universal coverage. They may want to just have their own hospital. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's probably we need to revisit the expanding Medicare for all.
There's a formula there that it would create some extra competition that would kind of hold in insurance companies to a little bit of a fire, or just give consumers options?
Both. You want to, because I'll admit that healthcare payers can be rather greedy, but they have certain laws they have to adhere to too. Here in California, it's called limited Knox-Keene license, that they have strong compliance. It's more on the fiscal or the financial side, but also quality outcomes. So they've, over with the new Obamacare, it's kind of blown up a little bit. A lot of payers or insurance companies have left the industry. It's created this dynamic in the market where you have just a few large healthcare coverage, healthcare carriers providing these services, and many of them are leaving the state. And why they're leaving the state is because of what they call the level of claims and the severity of claims, because it's a higher risk profile for a given region. So but yes, we want to increase competition if there's a way to do that, but it will probably be on the private side. But those that are seeking universal coverage, I think this is the answer. We just need to revisit it and just fine tune with what I share with you. There's technology out there that will simplify the administrative process, reduce the layers within administration, because that's really where the costs are skyrocketing, is you have too many layers. We want to reduce layers through automation. And those people that we displace from that process, let's re-educate them. Let's get them back into whatever level of what industry they want to be in. There's no reason. Like, I still go to school myself. I still go to UCI looking at predictive analytics. So give them that opportunity to go back in. And I'm covering a lot of bases, but I'm really passionate about healthcare because I know the ripple effect and the net change it would have on the industry as a whole when you start kind of collapsing it. But all in all, I think that's truly one answer, but I have yet to see the other healthcare reforms. The Republican plan I didn't really go into in great deal. I did review Obamacare extensively, and I've seen over the course of several years now, the premiums increase, the level of coverage going down. Yeah, so those are the areas that we're going to focus on.
Well, James, we're coming up to the end of our segment. We have a couple minutes left. So in those 2 minutes, I want to just ask you this, because it's something that you mentioned pretty prominently on your site, is this idea that, we need to get past partisanship and kind of unify our country and grow together. But, there's, and we saw it today on this interview, and thank you for being so upfront with us, there's legitimate differences between the opinions of various people who are interested in politics in this country. So how would you say, again, in the minute or two we have, how would you say are the best ways for us to express those differences and come up with solutions that everybody can live with?
First, focus on the commonalities. That'll bring you back together in a common frame. Then you bring up, naturally, the differences, and we just couldn't with mutual respect, bring them in and say, hey, listen, I need to look at this with a very objective opinion. We're all very emotional about certain topics, but we have to remove the emotion and look at the factual aspects of it. So I'm looking for the common points. We're going to work on the differences. We're going to try to find a balancing act. And maybe if great minds think alike, we'll come to an understanding that we'll give it a try and see if it works. But, that's the hardest part in politics that I see, is you deal with the emotion. That's what we're experiencing today, is the level of emotion divide in position is becoming very emotional, a roller coaster ride for many, even within my family. So I think I don't have the perfect plan. I'm certainly going to be refining what my thoughts are that would work. So I'm certainly open, and that probably is the best way to be.
You're here to heal the divide.
Yeah. Because we all want the same thing. Yep. We can't here's the statement I came up with. You can't make America great again until you make America whole again. We need to be whole together, united in some areas that we can work together in. And we'll start there. Then we'll work on the differences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but again, with the idea that we all have a voice and we all should be able to express those differences as well. I think sometimes there's this idea that, and I saw it on the other side of the spectrum too, with some Democrats who would say, well, when Obama was in office, well, people that are obstructing Obama's agenda should just shut up and just let him do his work, right? I mean, it's like, well, we all need to be heard. I mean, we're all Americans. We all want the best for the country.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's been my biggest observation, obstruction and resist, over the last year. I go, oh my gosh, if we just kind of move from that part and just give it a try, see if it works, then then we have reasons to resist. But we didn't even have a reason, in my opinion.
Well, James Bailey, it's been an interesting hour. Thank you so much for joining us today on NorCal News Now. I really did appreciate your views. I'm glad we could have a nice discussion and expose some differences and kind of come to some common ground too. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And all of you out there, don't forget NorCal News Now is available wherever you download your podcast. So check us out and subscribe. We can also be found on Facebook at NorCal News Now, where you can post your comments and suggestions for upcoming podcast topics and guests. So thanks to all of you for listening in. We'll be back at you soon with another episode of NorCal News Now. So long.